Hello, I'm Guy Kestervan, the Tester Man, and this is the tech video where I tell you what makes this Boardman TRVL 9.2 the gravel bike equivalent of a tank. And spoiler alert, it's not just the camo paint colour. But before I dive into the whys and wherefores, hit that subscription button so YouTube knows you're enjoying the channel, and maybe even consider joining my Patreon subscribers and supporting GuyKes TV long term, because that way you get all the edits ad-free. So starting with the frame, you can see aluminium tubing, but nice hydroform shaping and smoothed welds for that carbon fibre style look. Internal hose routing there for the brake and a spare slot for a dropper post running internally. A hexagonal? Yeah, six-sided. It's not quite a hexagon, but you know, anyway. It's a geometrically shaped down tube, quite a large down tube. You've got a two-position bottom mount there. You've got a two-position bottom mount there. Up on the sloping top tube, you've got a gas tank bag mount there. Coming back, you've got rack mounts for a 4-point rack. And again, they're picked up on the rear dropout there. And there's clearance for 50mm tyres behind these A-frame stays. And then under the belly here, you can see you've got another bottle stroke bag mount there. And then that brake hose just pops out under the bottom bracket before running externally along that offside chainstay. But if you look on these dropouts here, you can see you've got bang up to date aluminium UDH hanger. UDH stands for Universal Derailleur Hanger, so you're going to have no trouble finding a replacement for that gear hanger pretty much wherever you are in the world. That's now a universal standard fit. And you still don't see it on a lot of gravel bikes, even at the top end. So it's a big plus getting that on such an affordable bike. And as you can see, while the front end is relatively chunky tubes, you've got relatively slim alloy stays there. Nice snaking bit of shaping on the seat stays, and then relatively slim chain stays, and then crimped in at the front there to provide that 50mm tyre clearance that I mentioned earlier. Standard seat collar, and then it's a 31.6 seat post. So won't be a direct fit with most dropper and suspension posts for gravel, but get a shim in there and you'll be able to get 27.2mm posts in there, or you've got a full range of mountain bike options as well. And that is particularly useful because it's running Apex Axis. So Axis is SRAM's wireless communications protocol. In this case, it's just operating that rear mech. You can see the green light go on there as I make those shifts. Sorry, it's up against its limiter at the moment. So completely cable free. You've got battery on the back there, just clips in and out for nice easy recharging and replacement. So you always got the option to carry a spare, but like I say, completely wireless connection to these front shifters. And the nice thing about Apex is, just to simplify matters and to make sure, you know, maximise their economy of scale, you get the same transmitters and motors and other actuators in Apex as you do right through to top end SRAM Red. So the actual electric side of things is completely the same throughout the whole SRAM ecosystem, as they call it. Plus, you still get narrow wide chainring teeth to keep this chain secure. You get this really good looking, extra strong flat top chain, and you get an Explorer rear cassette. Slightly different from the top end stuff because you've still got a lock nut on there. It runs on the old splined style standard rather than XD free hub body on the rear wheel. So it's an 11 to 44 rather than a 10 to 44. But apart from that, you're getting a really wide single ring sequential transmission with super clean wireless communication. It just keeps that whole front end extra tidy. And I really, really like the most recent SRAM hoods as well. Started appearing on Rival, then moved to Apex. What's quite interesting, pretty much the same hood profile has now been used on top of the range SRAM Red Explorer. And that group set alone costs £4,000. So almost double the price of this complete bike. And what prompted me to talk about Axis first is the fact that you can get Axis wireless droppers as well. So You can have a dropper in there that you control from the brake levers at the front. You give both of them a double tap, and that'll raise and lower your dropper post. I mean, it's not the cheapest option. There are plenty of other cable options that you can get, but I have to say, cable options on drop bars never quite feel that great. So if you find, you know, you'd really like a dropper post on here, which I would say is pretty much the only thing I really missed, because it is such a capable bike, and we'll go into the reasons why that is in a minute, that a dropper post, and also some, which will, on the Reverb models, also, on the Reverb Explorer models, also comes with a little bit of suspension. You can set it up so you get about 25-30 mil of suspension travel in it, just to smooth out the ride, would be the #1 upgrade I would recommend for this bike. And the other thing worth saying is that this crankset, I mean, it's perfectly serviceable. It still runs on a SRAM dub, oversized axle and bottom bracket, but it is relatively heavy. It's the simplest of the SRAM gravel chain sets, and also that cassette, that also adds a chunk of weight to this bike as well. So overall weight comes in at just over 11.5 kilos. So it is pretty chunky. You know, you can get an alloy gravel bike around this price for probably under 10k, but then you're not getting that wireless transmission, and you're not getting this Rockshox Rudy fork either. And this is a big part of why this bike kind of really pushes the envelope of what you can do on a drop bar gravel bike, because you got 40 mil of suspension travel there. I mean, this is an 800 quid fork separately, but Boardman actually fit it to all three models in their TRVL travel, essentially, range, even the basic bike. So it's not just on this top one. All the bikes in the range get this genuinely controlled, genuinely useful 40 mil suspension fork, but it does add, I mean, obviously depending what fork you had in there, but a carbon fork would typically be around 600 to 700 grams. So you're adding between 500 and 600 grams of extra weight with this Rudy fork. But not only does it give you much greater comfort, much greater control on descents, but having used it a lot on my Santa Cruz Stigmata long-termer bike, I also find it really helps on the climbs, certainly rough, lumpy climbs. It just helps that whole front wheel move and roll over impacts that would normally kind of knock the stuffing and speed out of the bike. And if you need to honk it up a climb, then it's got a nice little low profile lockout lever on there. And then on the far side, it's got an air cap, so it's fully adjustable, so you can run it as firm or as fluid as you want, depending on your weight or depending on your preferences. The only thing I would say is if you've watched the live ride, then you'll have heard me comment that that back end, especially with that relatively stout seat post in there, is a bit jarring compared to the front end, because that is so smooth. Even with these 45mm Goodyear connector tyres on here, set up tubeless. It doesn't come tubeless as standard. I've added valves and sealant just to compare it to other bikes I've tested in this category, and basically to add puncture survivability as well, because I've been hammering around on this bike and I don't want to be replacing tubes all the time. I would definitely say get your shop, wherever you get it from, Halfords or Treads, to convert the bike to tubeless before you pick it up if you can, because it comes with tubes as standard. But being able to run the tyres lower pressure without worrying about punctures makes a big difference to the comfort, grip and control of this bike. But another thing, adding to the enhanced control that you get with this TRVL, as well as those Goodyear connector tyres, I mean, not massively grippy, but a good large volume on there, so a good comfortable tyre. And like I say, you can run it at low pressures without worrying too much because of that extra volume in there. You're also getting quite progressive geometry, so that's a 70.5 degree head angle on there, sloping top tube, so you actually get a reasonable length of seat post extension even when I'm riding this large frame. So it's a 500mm seat tube, but a 585mm top tube, giving a reach of 406mm. 150mm head tube for a nice relatively upright riding position, and it means you don't need any weirdo riser bars fitted to it. It's just a fairly standard, slightly flared but reasonable width bar on there, size specific as well. So 400mm, 420mm and 440mm. It's an 80mm stem, standard on the large. Medium bikes get an 80mm as well. Extra large gets a 90mm. And you also get, forgot to mention that before, you also get size-specific cranks as well, so 165, 170 or 172.5, depending on the size of the bike. You're also getting a really good quality Physic Argo saddle and decent quality silicone bar tape with a bit of grip, and proper screw-in bar end plugs. Now, one of the first things to fall off most gravel bikes are just the push-in plugs, so it's nice to actually have a proper clamp-in plug on there. And I have to say, the whole bike just kind of oozes an impressive amount of quality. Certainly for the fact, with all this spec on, it's just over 2K. And the one part of the GO I didn't talk about, seat angle 73.5. So relatively conventional, nothing weird going on there. So it means your saddle and pedaling position is just going to feel spot on. As you can see, there's a reasonable amount of fore and aft adjustment in that saddle rail anyway, if you want to nudge the effective seat angle forward or back a bit. And on the stock post, you've got a nice, secure, easily adjustable 2-bolt clamps. And again, that's a real help when, you know, there's a fair likelihood you're going to be putting a heavily loaded saddlebag onto those saddle rails. So the last thing you want is your saddle tilting or creaking all over the place. And then flipping it round, you've got a neat little chainstay install for the rear disc. So it runs 160s as standard for plenty of stopping power, fully hydraulic brake system. And then another really impressive up-to-date piece of frame design. That's a T47 bottom bracket, which is kind of the new standard that the industry is trying to push forward as kind of the universal. It's basically an oversized threaded bottom bracket that will cope with all axle types. So again, really nice to have that in there alongside the UDH to really future-proof this frame. And then here again, if you want to run and drop a post, then there's a little port there. So there you go. That's the tech, geometry and spec details on the Boardman TRVL 9.2. But obviously, if you want a really good idea of how this bike actually rides, then make sure you check out my live ride review video as well, because that really shows how versatile and fun, let's not forget, that's the whole point of riding these things, how fun this bike is to ride on a lot of varied terrain and different missions, everywhere from fetching sausages to Yorkshire Pud to chasing mountain bikes down some fairly technical single track. Because that is where the versatility provided by more progressive geometry and that 40mm of suspension travel really helps out. I'm not saying it's a mountain bike, but in gravel terms, this is about as brave as you can get. So well worth considering if you're finding your conventional gravel bike a bit restricting in where you can go. But on the other hand, if you want a lighter, more race-focused bike, then check out the Boardman Advanced 9.2, because that comes with a carbon fibre frame that weighs under 1 kilo, plus the same SRAM Apex axis group set that you've got here, but with racier geometry and less tyre clearance. But for now, I've been Guy Kesteven on Guy Kes TV, talking about Boardman's brand new TRVL 9.2.